Screwdriver, Parkour Forever?
Yes.
Team Fortress 2 meets Mirror's Edge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you explain better, perhaps, what that is or was?
Yeah, absolutely. So, not going to bore everybody with the real detailed story because there is if anybody does want to know the real history behind this, we actually have on our No Bright Shadows website, we have a dev blog. Very long, very detailed history. But, the cliff notes are, way back, turn back the hands of time to 2011. Great old Mecha the Slag made
14 years ago now. Yeah.
Yep. Great old Mecha the Slag made Parkour Fortress, which at the time it was still is, but it was a Mirror's Edge, essentially just the Mirror's Edge movements, right? And put them in TF2 and slap the timer on it. Little nothing really complicated in terms of that. It was something that even at the time it had a lot of potential. And as time went on, that grew increasingly popular, like really, really popular. At one point, that server was the number one on Game Tracker, I believe.
Nice.
For Team Fortress 2, at least for a decent amount of time, actually.
Can I give you my one snippet of like lore that I know about? I think it's Mecha the Slag's version of Parkour Fortress.
By all means.
And that is that James Benson animated the hand over hand action that you could experience playing that game. I think you most often saw it when you're climbing up or down a drain pipe. And James Benson was the guy who later went on to animate Alex's hands in Half-Life Alyx.
Learn something new all the time. I actually did not know that at all.
There you go. Every day's a learning opportunity. Anyway, sorry, I butted in there.
But, it was, just generally, the servers were real popular, despite, admittedly, there were some features lacking in terms of, things that we take for granted today. Things like actually being able to store, how long your speed runs are, things like that. It was, very, kind of bare bones, but at the same time,
unrefined.
Yeah. But at the same time, it was just such a novel concept, and so many people loved, the kind of innocent exploration that came with that game mode, came with that experience. And it said it blew up, right? As time went on, its popularity actually didn't really fade, but the attention from its creator admittedly did, right? And that's not a knock on Mecha or anybody really, but I can completely understand going from working on modding and going into becoming a studio and now even a publisher.
Yeah,
which is where they are now.
I genuinely don't know what has happened to Mecha the Slag, and I can only assume that they've gone from strength to strength as well. It'd be quite interesting having them on at some stage in the future and sort of finding out what they're up to.
Oh yeah, no, that would answer a lot of questions for me.
For sure. At a certain point, Mecha abandoned the project and it sat dormant for a while, and then you ended up taking over?
Our first attempts were, okay, can we get this thing out of Mecha's hands? And every attempt at doing so pretty much failed.
Interesting.
Yeah, we just wanted to see what path to take, and funny story is that one of his devs at the time when everything was already abandoned, at one point guessed the password for his subversion correctly.
Oh, yeah.
He, despite being in contact with us, he never thought, oh yeah, those guys really wanted the Parkour Fortress stuff, and he kind of just closed it and left it alone and completely forgot what he had guessed. and that was the
No.
closest that we got
Oh no,
to
brutal.
avoiding probably a couple of years of work.
I mean, at the same time, though, like the what you ended up doing with it was essentially a complete rebuild. You already had like the vision.
Right?
Yeah,
It would have been that either way. It was just a matter of figuring out how,
yeah,
because
okay,
one of the one of the problems is it's not necessarily difficult to implement those types of motions that you see in Mirror's Edge, things like that. But what is hard is getting it to the standard of quality and precision
yeah.
that it was at when Mecha hosted it, and it was very specific.
I wasn't going to go into this in too much detail, but you brought it up. What do you mean? I mean, when you say a standard of quality, what are you aiming for? Does it need to be 100%? Does it need to be perfect? How do you judge that? Is that something that you decide ahead of time that you're going to be working towards, or is it something that you kind of have a feel for in the moment?
Right. So for something like Parkour Fortress that we worked on for a while, well, I say a while, 6 years is a while.
That's
Um,
a while. Yeah.
yeah. For
Is
something
that a
like
long
that,
while? That's a long while. Okay.
yeah, I'd say so. Um, for something like that, in terms of quality, it's really I would say it's more precision, right? Because what we were aiming to do is recapture something that was already there. At
Yeah.
times, that involved, uh, just to give some examples, um, we had to take recordings, not even demos, but recordings, screen recordings, and go frame by frame over the positions of players on Mecha's server before it went down. And we had to inspect the
Yeah.
movements frame by frame and reconstruct a mathematical equation to figure out, you know,
Okay.
what exactly is going on with each of these movements.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that being both frustrating from like the perspective of trying to re-envisage something that already exists and deliver it in a way that is acceptable to the active audience. But
Yeah.
also from your perspective as well, when you're trying to make something cool or make something viable that looks and feels right, you're not you're not starting from a blank canvas. You're starting from other people's expectations and other people's beliefs on what your project should be, and then trying to match what you can do to what that is. Even if you find a better way of doing it or a more interesting way of doing it, it won't be accepted by the community unless it is essentially frame by frame perfect to what they'd originally perceived.
Yes. And part of that as well was mitigating the scope of the project because should we change, even down to the realm of, one hammer unit, 1 inch of a
Yeah.
movement, then every single level needs to change to accommodate that
Yeah.
if you want everything to be possible how it was before.
The story for you, your story of development or of creativity didn't end at Parkour Fortress.
No, not at all. From the beginning, well, not the very beginning, but from a certain point in Parkour Fortress's development, the goal was to start a studio, start an indie studio, and kind of work up from there, right? Um,
Yep.
there are some kind of soapboxy goals that I have in mind in terms of the games industry and doing things in a different way. When it comes to treating employees in a company in the games industry, something that I would like to see be a standard, and that's kind of like a personal mission of sorts, that I'd like to kind of push through my studio. But that aside, um, in terms of creative efforts, Our original plan was actually from the start, let's make the Parkour Fortress standalone, but we had something in the way. And that something
Yeah.
was, well, we don't have the skill to do this, flat out. We, you know, there is no at this point there was no TF2 SDK. There was a Source
Yeah.
SDK, but that
Yeah.
was extremely daunting of a task. Um, so we settle on Unreal, and we say, all right, we need to produce at the very least one full title end to end and actually release and actually put our hearts into it and actually make something creative that has nothing to do with parkour before
Hmm.
we revisit that. At least in the sense of a standalone non-source engine, like an actual Unreal project with something more unique on the
Okay.
table. Yeah.
First of all, can we address the sort of the we aspect?
Yeah.
Um, who are the we that you are referring to?
So at the very beginning, or rather, I should say, at the point that we decided that we wanted to move forward with creating a studio, um, it was a team of 5 or 6 of us who, now I had offered to plenty of the development and staff of, who helped make Parkour Fortress, who's interested in this, and we ended up with that group of around 5 or 6.
Hmm.
Um, we call them the Pioneers. That was our little nickname for that group. Um,
Sure.
and we ended up forming the studio with that group, and it did grow from there.
In context, how many people had been working on Parkour Fortress at that time,
At that time, well, that is a
or
good question.
possibly even up to
Something,
that point?
yeah. So including, everybody, mappers, what would we say, like moderation staff as well, or
Yeah,
just development?
there's stated to development for the time being.
Yeah, I would say probably around 12, 14 people.
Okay.
Um, Something along those lines, at least back then. And that kind of falls in line with the current status of the studio that we run, which is actually at around 18, 19 people.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, but yeah,
So,
that
so the
is
six
pretty much
the
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 we.
six pioneers that came over were essentially hardcore, or just a particular group of friends that you felt that you could work together with, or that believed in you enough to come with you to No Bright Shadows.
Yeah, yeah, essentially. Yeah. I mean, they trust me, I trust them, and it all worked out.
Okay, we're jumping to the end. We're skipping all over like the multiverse or the timeline in a moment. So you begun No Bright Shadows with the intent of developing a game. Did you?
Yeah.
I mean, the game that I know you for. In fact, I think we've seen demos of it played on TF Connect a couple of times now. Actually, thinking about it, but that's the Crystal Ball Critters, which is you're playing a. I don't know why I'm trying to tell you what it is, but you're playing a hamster inside a ball, running around, picking up crystals.
Well, uh, close. So the gist of that game, it's really simple by design, right? Because we're doing a lot with it. But you've got an up to 5 player party game, and
Hmm.
it's essentially a ball race. You get from point A to point B. You've got, around 10 stages, and
Yep.
you accumulate points from there. Real straightforward concept, but it's about the wacky stuff that happens in between, right? Taking
The
that
Benjamin
super
Clone way.
simple concept and just like blowing it out of proportion with gimmicks.
Are
That's
you
kind of
thinking?
the whole deal.
Presumably, the balls have hats.
That's a spoiler. Nah, I'm joking. But I mean, I That'll probably happen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Got to happen, really, isn't it?
Yeah. But I mean, we do have cosmetics in the game, but they're, you know, um, there's stuff that you earn in the game itself. Just to give an example of the kind of like out of box slapstick type of humor, one of the current items we have pitched, this is a bit of a spoiler, but I'll say it anyway. Um, Somebody pitched a Sisyphus item, which takes the character out of the ball and just moves them
Okay.
behind the ball. That's all it
Oh,
does.
oh, that's genius. That works so well, though. Oh my god,
Yeah.
so good. So,
Um,
it's a kind of a movement game where you're moving around a map, trying to get from point to point in the shortest amount of time. Or, I mean, can you
yeah.
see this being played at like GDQ or something of that nature? Are you hoping for speedrunners to break the game?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, no, absolutely. I can see that happening. We have some mechanics in there that kind of raise that skill ceiling a little bit to
nice.
help make that possible.
Ace.
But admittedly, I did shift the focus a bit away from speedrunning for the sake of doing something different. While it is still a
Okay.
racing, kind of like race with your friends, it's supposed to be a little
Yeah.
bit more party game, right? Something
Okay.
that,
Okay.
you get together in real life, couch co-op, like split screen, whatever, have a couple of drinks, and just, laugh and have a fun time.
So going back to the timeline, you've been developing this for a number of years now.
Yes. It'd be, I believe we started in 2022. We're about 3 years in.
Not too bad. Well, it's 2.5, maybe 3 years at the most.
Yeah.
That's not too bad. So you're. I mean, I from the last conversation we had, you're heading off to the UK at some time in the near future with the intent of allowing people to try the game out live. Does that mean you're near conclusion for it?
So what we have right now is, I mean, you may have heard of the term vertical slice. If you haven't, it's essentially just our mechanics are essentially in place. We
Yep.
have, um, kind of the how is there, but we need to make more content. We need more in terms of, levels and more stuff for people to actually play through. So now we're expanding on that portion of the game.
Fire in chat has just dropped a link to the game, so that's quite cool of them.
Yes,
Has
thank
a
you very
release
much.
date of 5th of December.
Yes.
Uh, how on target are you for that?
As of right now, I would say so. I believe we're going to make that date, not 100%, right?
Cool.
Nothing's ever 100%, but can safely say in any case, um, it's not going to be something that's, even if it were to get pushed back, which I really hope not, it wouldn't be for very long.
So
It's just a
full
matter of getting more
expectation of being
content.
able to play it at the next TF Connect then.
Oh, I hope so. Yeah, that's the best case scenario.
That's
That's the
excellent.
yeah.
Yeah. Nice. So I mean we talked a little bit about Crystal Ball Critters. I know that the audience that is likely to tune into this are less interested in that as a game, but I think it's are much more interested in the Fortress Forever, what you're doing with that. I think that um, the focus on this game, from my perspective, on Crystal Ball Critters, from my perspective, is proving that you or your team are capable of delivering a game if they work on it. To that end, I would say there's a couple of things. Number one, as executive director of No Bright Shadows, I have in my head an expectation of what that title means. It's something that's on your website that's listed against you, and if we look at the sort of the roles that exist, you maybe just as an instance, that seems to be the top dog. Is that something? Is this your studio, um, uh, or do you not see yourself fulfilling that role?
Oh, so that's a bit of a yes and a no, right? So
Oh,
in a sense, I am kind of poised as it is as the figurehead of sorts, as you know, the leader. So in a leadership sense,
yeah.
absolutely. In a sense of ownership, far less. And the reason I say that, and that is fully by design, um, are, not to bore anybody, but with corporate talk or anything like that. But this is actually a rather important concept. Um, we consider ourselves a worker cooperative,
Okay.
meaning everybody who actually works with us essentially has voting rights. And if I'm not doing my job as a leader, every year they can just boot me. And
Okay.
I can't really say anything about that, right? But it's kind of like a worker democracy of sorts.
So what do you perceive your role of as? Trying to find the right words for this. How do you perceive your role of leading, or what does leading mean to you?
Right. So in a sense, I believe in, another concept that some may have heard of, servant leadership, right?
Yeah.
I'm here to essentially not be somebody that points fingers and says gets this done, although obviously if, push comes to shove that can happen, but it's really more of, okay, we know what we need to do. Let me help you get there and make sure that nothing gets in the way.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, I'm nodding away because that's how I perceive myself as within any kind of environments. That's essentially what I'm here to do, is to move all the roadblocks, allow the project to be successful as it can be, and keep things moving.
Precisely.
And yeah, don't get in the way of people who are doing successful work or good work. Um, yeah, so that's really cool. It's great to have someone who doesn't sort of hold themselves above and beyond everyone else, and particularly the opportunity to sort of unseat you, if there's a perception that you're not achieving the goals. How do you reconcile that with the act of uh, bringing people into the team, deciding who needs to be there? You've spoken about sort of the growth that the team has had from your origins of being just 6 people to all of the people who currently work for them, work with you and for you now. How do you perceive? How do you allow yourself to be um, to decide who gets to work and who should be excluded from the group?
Right. So that's a great question. All right.
That's what I'm here
So
for.
yeah, um, putting it one way here, we usually we'll put out a general inquiry to, wherever it may be, different servers, different places. We try to find people, and we do the standard process that you'd hear of, going to like quick call, quick interview, something like that.
Mm,
Um, and kind of just try to get an idea of, what somebody has to offer. But um truthfully, in a situation like ours, it's not exactly like we have too much, um, how should I say, too much leverage, right? Because at the end of the day, as it is, even though people who join our team do earn a share of the company, they're taking a major risk. They're putting in their time and effort, and
yeah,
if the whole thing flops, at the end of the day, then they get little to nothing, and that is a risk that they take.
yeah,
So, when somebody is willing to take that risk and put in that time and effort, that is dare I say, already like 3/4 of the way there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That level of commitment is commendable in and of itself.
Yeah, no,
So,
no, absolutely.
I mean, the No Bright Shadows thing, you're working on Crystal Critters, strong expectations of it being delivered this year. It's being the game itself is being built on Unreal Engine.
Yes.
Um, how did you find the transition from Steam, or presumably some source mod variant that you were utilizing to build the Parkour Fortress? How did you? Was it a smooth transition to working on Unreal?
I mean, it's a lot of learning, right? But at the same time, I mean, I might get some flack for this, but oh god, it's so
By
much
all means.
easier. It's so much
Oh,
easier.
okay. Yeah, I was gonna say presumably, um, I mean, Unreal. Not a developer myself, but I'm uh, in the press that I've read about it. There are tools. There's a whole sort of process that's available for you within Unreal that you could not expect to have in a version of Steam that was built in 2000 and God knows 5. I mean, it's a much newer and much more updated engine. Is there anything in particular that you missed from Steam that you didn't have in Unreal, or is it all like up? Is it all pluses in Unreal?
Oh, I mean, the only thing would be yeah, there is exactly one thing. I think it's pretty much all pluses.
The
The
one thing.
the one thing is for all the hate that it gets, a lot of things are still easier to do in Valve's Hammer editor.
Okay.
Specifically, I can, because I came from doing level design first. Um, if I had an idea in my head for a very simple, I'm going to put down blocks and see what they look like so I can
Hmm.
iterate on that. That process to this day I still find is easier in this bit of software that Valve made 20 years ago,
Yeah.
which that's a little bit of a shame to say that, but that is the experience I've had so far. But that's about
That
it.
one thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always blown away. Part of me is caught up on the idea of what development should be, and like the concept that you see in the movies of people like tapping away at a keyboard and then things like magically appearing, versus what I'm sure is the reality of people sat around in desks and waving pens in the air and um uh many hours, if not days, if not months, if not years of tapping away at a keyboard just to get one small curve in exactly the right place. What I'm driving towards here is can you help me understand what the process is for developing Crystal Ball Critters? Is it starting with a level? Is it starting with an idea? Is it starting with the concept of movement itself? Is it starting with levels of transparency? I mean, how do you figure out what you need to do first?
Right. So that is something that we've thought about a lot, obviously. It's a bit hard to kind of encapsulate what that process looks like, but we do, in fact, have like I would say pretty solid process. It, like you say, it does really hinge on figuring out what we want to do, right?
Yeah.
Um, what we've come up with, well, for those in software development in particular, this isn't particularly new. Um, although perhaps for some game developers it may be. Just as a quick aside, there were a good chunk of us coming into this that had experience doing software outside of game development.
Yep.
And kind of bringing a little bit of that strategy and a little bit of that planning into it. So, I mean, the gist is starting with a big idea, a big chunk, something that needs to be done, and just breaking it down. Just breaking down every little piece that needs to go into that,
Right.
down to like the very, very minuscule requirements of, what makes that up. And once we know what needs to be done, the how and, actually doing it kind of just tends to fall into place.
Okay. So in project management terms, you're working things into stages and then figuring out what you need to deliver in each of those stages. Is there, without getting too much into the weeds of this, presumably working in some sort of agile environment where you have a concept of what it is you're trying to deliver, and every time you deliver a thing, you work on it, figure out whether or not it's beneficial, what you can take forward to the next stage, etc. Or do you look at it from a waterfall perspective where you literally break everything down to its core essence and then work on each individual thing until it's perfected and then move on to the next?
Yeah, so we try our best at times to go for the former, the agile, iterative, more iterative perspective. This is something that I've learned from other studios in the industry. I've had the opportunity to interact with a good couple of people, but one of the key flaws with that is that it's something that takes a lot of maturity and a lot of getting used to. I say maturity in terms of doing it for a while, right? And getting used
as opposed to wearing a suit kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's just something that one of the drawbacks is just how long it takes to get into gear with a system like that, especially when you're adding new people who might not be familiar, and sometimes there's a little bit of fighting back. There's a little bit of oh, if you just let me do this my way, we'll see so many short-term gains, so many short-term improvements, but you need to kind of be a little bit steadfast, like hey, this is
work
kind of the
on
industry,
the bigger picture of like how do we make everything cool,
get the whole machine,
just your one thing cool.
Precisely.
So I mean, that is admirable that you've been able to stick to that. You mentioned that there's like you've come from a software development platform, and a few of the team have. Have you? We haven't really spoken about what it is that you do for a living, or the role that No Bright Shadows has had in your life or the lives of those who joined early and those who continue to work on it. But is No Bright Shadows your primary employer at the moment, or?
Not at the moment. So I do primarily. I still have my my day job. Work as a programmer. I work for it's a university down here, South Florida. Primarily, I do. Just keep it brief. It's something that a lot of people hate. I do AI code, but now, mind you,
well, it's been great having you on. I think that's a very long interview.
I only do it because it pays the bills, right? I got the job, and then after getting the job, they tell me, "All right, you're working on AI."
Oof. Okay.
Okay. I mean, I'll do it. The salary's real nice, so I'll do it.
Sure.
But
okay.
At the very least, the benefit is I get to be in control of how to use that stuff in an ethical way, and in a way that actually is useful, right? So I get to be in control of how not to do that stuff in a really stupid way.
I mean, a part of me is thinking, let's move right on, but another part of me is intrigued by the possibilities that maybe this opens you up to in terms of creativity. I sort of almost want to dwell on it for a little bit. Like, do you see if that's
Oh,
okay
feel
with you.
free. No, feel free by all means.
I mean, I know this is something that is going to come up just across the board more and more often, but do you see the work that you're doing in particular with regards to AI as being something that you can then utilize later when it comes to not necessarily coding, but like all aspects of creativity?
In terms of AI, I view it very simply as I understand why some people may want to go that route, but in terms of what I do and applying it, I would say not, because
Okay.
it's very plainly put. There's a certain value and a certain charm that really comes with, I think, the human creation of artwork,
Yeah.
and that kind of ties into the core ethics of a company like No Bright Shadows. And I think because of that specific case, it's not something that I would apply. Now, are there some, at least that's in terms of art. Now, I do see someone in chat bringing up like co-pilots, for example. One thing, if somebody said, "Oh, would you do dialogue using like an LLM or something like that to like
Yeah.
spice it up?" You know, always open to experimentation. Never say never, but the general gist is kind of like, that's looked at with such a frown that it might as well just be avoided.
Yeah, for me, if I can interject at this point,
Yeah.
for me, I always see AI as being a great way of getting away from a blank page.
Oh, yeah.
AI gets you from nothing to something, but the finished product needs to come from a human, otherwise humans will reject it.
Oh, absolutely. And this was at one point a discussion that our studio needed to have was what to what level is using an AI tool acceptable. And we actually settled pretty much there was no final product, no nothing even really intermediary, but for the sake of brainstorming,
Mm.
it is allowed. Not
Okay.
necessarily encouraged, but it's something that, if somebody finds benefit in it, as
Yeah.
long as, if you're an artist, as long as no like, clearly nonsensical designs make it into your final product,
Yeah.
then, at that point, that is, perfectly fine,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Weird brag, but I wrote something the other day and I asked ChatGPT to fix it, to write it more in a particular style. And the thing that they delivered was more or less verbatim, exactly what I'd written. It's effectively like AI saying, "I have no notes." It's like, okay, either that means I now write in AI, or more likely, um, I have been so influenced by a variety of things that exist in this world to this point that I've almost become homogenous with the existing world. Yeah, I'll probably edit that bit out. I'm not sure quite how or why I'm bragging. I'm going to blame the beer. Given that you've had that experience creating a game in Unreal Engine, the No Bright Shadows, Crystal Ball Critters, but Valve finally came up with the TF2 SDK. You decided or have decided or on the fence as to whether or not you want to revisit Parkour Fortress and do it again using the tools that Valve have provided you with, Is
Hmm.
that it? Is that right?
Well, so the best way to put it is, um, we set up this GoFundMe due in part for fundraising for the studio in general. And the idea is that obviously I can't split, fully my time um, back over to a source engine project, especially, not full time, right?
Yeah.
What I can do, however, is direct one from my experience working on the original. And like we kind of touched on earlier, knowing the what is kind of that's kind of half the battle already, right? Knowing what you want. Um,
Yeah.
so in that sense, Parkour Forever is going to be more of a. I'll say the main goal for it is to be a port. Very minimal new content added, at least initially,
Yeah.
right? The thought is bring it to the standalone and have that be a good, stable place for the game mode to kind of rest and be for a bit. Something more stable than what it is right now, which is just a game mode on a single server.
Okay.
That,
So I
yeah.
mean, I recall from conversations with Free Fortress, certainly in house, they had an expectation of being able to port their game developed in a somewhat illegal, dubious, whatever version of Steam onto the new TF2 SDK, and it's only through discovery of that of trying to implement it that they discovered it's actually not that easy. It's not that straightforward. Um, do you see? Have you tried to port something over? Have you tried to move existing content from the original Parkour Fortress or your version of Parkour Fortress onto the new TF2 SDK, or is that some sort of pipe dream expectations that surely how hard can it be?
Oh, that's a fun one. So I myself, while I've not personally tried, I am one of my very close friends really understands, really like gets this stuff, right?
Okay.
We are very aware of how difficult this is.
I'm glad that the word that you chose to use was difficult. We've already mentioned the GoFundMe, the expectation of raising funds to do this particular version of the game. Like what's the perception, at least from your side? What's the perception of how this will be utilized, or how this will be realized?
Right. So this project is indeed happening under No Bright Shadows. The idea is some of there's going to be a portion of the GoFundMe money, which is going to go to help compensate the primary developers.
Hmm.
Right now, I mean, it's one primary developer and somebody who's going to kind of be learning off of them. So it's really
Yep.
two people. Um, and they're going to be really doing the vast majority of the work, especially in terms of things like code, things like that. Um, Now, looking at everything else, where does the rest of our team, No Bright Shadows, where do we get involved? The
Yeah.
idea is to keep that um, minimal, but not necessarily exclude it, right? Our focus is on Crystal Ball Critters, and that is the top priority, is to get that out on time. But
Yep.
it is also a reality that, and this is something you may be familiar with yourself. There are times, there's plenty of times where people are open to doing something. They're open to working on something. They have some drive, but you might not actually have anything on the plate to give them,
Yeah.
and that happens surprisingly often. So when things like that happen, that's when I can pull over to, the small team that's going to be tackling Parkour Forever and say, "Hey, do you guys need anything from, say, 2D artist, 3D artist, or sounds, or whatnot?"
My mind is going back to discussions of Valve, and when they get very close to releasing the game, they everybody stops doing whatever it is they're doing, or their side projects have actually closed down, and everybody ups their desks and wheels it into the elevators and takes it onto the floor of whatever that game is about to be released to, and they all start working, beavering furiously away at trying to get that one particular game up and out. Surely this is some sort of version of insanity for you to try to have when you get so close to releasing this game that you've been developing for the last couple of years. to pull people aside and to offer them up as having another thing to do, a different thing to do. How are you managing that?
Yeah, so that's been thought of. The kind of situation is that, believe it or not, the existing skills aren't that transferable. Um, so the existing version of Parkour Fortress, it's made in, it's a thing called source mod. Um,
Yep.
and source mod, that's kind of its own beast, right?
Okay.
That stuff made for that, while some of the concepts might overlap with source engine itself, they are two very different beasts, and the source engine is far more difficult.
I think I already know the answer to this question. I'm going to ask it anyway. Yeah. Why are you doing this? Why start this? Why start it now?
Hmm. So directing something like this takes up, of all the things that I do have to do to support the studio, a relatively minimal amount of time just in terms of directing, right?
Okay.
If I can get a kind of autonomous unit working on this and producing it, then the rest of the fundraiser money goes on to help the studio. And even if that ends up not being an insane amount, it's anything above what we need to operate goes miles, right? You'd be surprised
Right.
how many indie games end up being a flop versus a success just because they were short a couple grand
Okay.
in marketing money.
So, I mean that's the answer I kind of wasn't expecting you to come up with. What if I can pitch an answer to you? Um, the this is what I thought you were going to say.
Hit me.
You can correct me. Um, I think Parkour Fortress is awesome. Like whether it's Mecha the Slag's version and whether it's your version, whether it's a little bit like sort of Prop Hunt in that
Yeah.
every game, every modern like first person shooter has a version of Prop Hunt. And they all think they were the first people to come up with it. Like they all think they're the best version of it. Um, I think the Parkour Fortress is just such a cool, fun thing to do. That if you didn't do it, if the people who have most recently come up with a fully validated, fully working version didn't do it, someone else eventually would. And now that TF2 has its own SDK, now that the tools that weren't previously available are now available, if you didn't do it, someone else would. And maybe they'd do a good job. Maybe.
Mm,
But realistically, it would never have that same feel
right.
that you'd managed to achieve
You know,
with Parkour Fortress.
truthfully,
It,
that
yeah.
thought never went through my mind. But now that you say it, god dang it. Um that is actually fully true as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I'm. I want to believe that while you never thought it, that was a thought. Like
Well,
it resonates.
there is now, I'll say there is a passion behind it. I don't want to come
Hmm.
off like saying, "Oh, we just do it for the money." No. So,
No.
like I did say earlier on, the original intent that we had was to create another version of Parkour Fortress, because that really
It.
was where the passion was originally,
I mean,
right?
origins of No Bright Shadows. It's what. Yeah. It's where you
Yeah,
guys came
yeah.
from.
But the fact is that, yes, time-wise, this is not necessarily the time for like the grand vision, as in
Okay.
this isn't all that we're going to get. Parkour Forever is actually not all that we're going to get. um, the idea really is long term, at least the way that I'm seeing it. And this is not a guarantee or an announcement or anything like that. Just kind of
Yeah.
the general gist is this port happens so that the people who really love what's there have something that they can come back to, something nostalgic, something that is exactly what they expect out of the Parkour Fortress experience. But after that's completed, that's when we want to start innovating. That's when we want to start looking at potentially doing another game with that concept.
Yeah.
That really brings some new elements to the table and get to express the creativity that we've had kind of bottled up ever since like 2011.
Can I ask how? Obviously, a lot of people that started No Bright Shadows, the core. What do you guys call yourselves? The core six or
The pioneers.
the pioneers? The team that is No Bright Shadows now is bigger than just the pioneers.
Yes.
How do the people that came to you since those days? What do they think of Fortress Forever? What do they think about the work that you used to do?
Yeah, surprisingly, a good lot of them actually came from that community.
Oh, really?
There were not staff in that community, but because we posted for these positions that we were looking for within that community, I would say maybe 3/4 of the team, aside from that core group, um, probably came from that parkour community.
Oh, wow.
To start
Okay. Is there anyone? I mean, I don't want you to like start name checking everyone who works with you, but
with.
is there anyone who has no exposure to it all and came in sort of completely from the dark side of the world?
Yeah, there are. Um, there were definitely a couple. For example, at one point we brought in a 3D modeler who, was somebody that came exclusively from the Unreal community.
I'm kind of getting the impression, at least now, that the conversation I had with Pre-Fortress, with the Pre-Fortress guys, was that the new SDK, the TF2 SDK, fundamentally changes their outlook on how they code, on what they develop and deliver. One of the questions I had lined up for you was, what does the TF2 SDK mean to you, you personally, and you as a studio? But I'm getting the impression that it's cool because you can now utilize old projects and see them again. But I don't think it goes much further than that. Is it good? Is it something that you're like happy and grateful for, or is it just a tool?
So, dare I say, there are elements of both of those statements that are true, right? In a sense, yes, this is a tool that is making this project possible.
Yeah.
And, that that's just an objective fact, right? Um, but at the same time, there is excitement in it from the kind of TF2 modding perspective. Um, Now, in a personal sense, it is something that splits me. And I'm sure this might go for a couple of others on my team as well. It splits me a little bit because in the process of getting into general game development, especially Unreal, all of that,
Yeah.
I had to learn to distance myself a bit from Team Fortress 2 in the modding community. And the reason being that if I let myself stay, that would take up my time. That would take up all my energy.
You'd get nothing done because you were far too busy to get anything done.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
having to separate myself from that for such a long time and now seeing, okay, these grand new possibilities are open in that space, it is a bit bittersweet in a sense, right? It
Yeah.
almost feels like seeing an old friend again.
Yeah. Except the old friend has gone to the gym and figured out how to do taekwondo and Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't know whether or not how you'd fit into their friend group anymore.
precisely. You don't really know if you still get along or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Different values.
Yeah, no, that's actually scarily accurate. Actually, the more I think about it. Yeah.
With that in mind, then, the developer for the TF2 SDK is still working for Valve, is still adding stuff in. I know that MCOMs is adding to the utility and helping make things super awesome. Is there anything that you would want to be able to bring over from Unreal that you'd like to see in like a newer version of the TF2 SDK?
The difference really comes in ease of use and modernization. So I would say there's a lot of changes that were made in Source 2, actually. That
Right.
would be almost a better frame of reference. Um,
Okay.
because Source 2 is very comparable to Unreal's editor.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I would say those are much more comparable. And, having a lot of those features, for example, I can make models inside the editor. I don't need to go out to Blender. Even
Okay.
if they are a little bit more primitive, like that alone is just a huge workflow improvement if you're a level designer.
The version of the engine that I think that Valve develops in is better than the version of the engine that Valve used to develop in. And until those two are sort of brought to parity, there's almost no point in having this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, pretty much, to be honest. But um, with that said, I mean, one does have to ask the question of whether it's worth it in all cases. I mean,
Mm.
part of the charm of something like the TF2 SDK is that it is, dare I say, a little bit aged, but not in the bad way. In a way that,
Okay, like a
for
fine
example,
wine.
yeah, no, really, like a fine wine. Like I go
Really?
on there, I see the
Okay.
more kind of blocky looking, nostalgic um experience that when you go into a newer engine, everything is more high fidelity.
Yeah.
And for a lot of things that can actually be a negative. It doesn't really have that same kind of that nostalgia factor to it.
There's a reason why Minecraft is one of the best-selling games. It's just your imagination, whilst restricted to blocks, is infinite.
Exactly.
Cool. I'm gonna leave it questions there. The two things I'm gonna say at this point is number one, what question didn't I ask you that you had hoped that I would?
I actually can't think of I think you really actually hit pretty much everything.
All these questions generated on your own AI. No, okay, that's it's not true. Would you be okay to like if I open the floor to the audience, if anyone has any questions to ask you? Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine.
Oh, there we go. Mix the rules. Hopefully, I can kick you out afterwards.
Is this your first forte into source specific modding then?
Um, so in terms of the engine itself, so disregarding source mod,
Yeah. Outside of the
right,
plugin side of servers, that kind of thing. Just
right.
straight TF2 source engine itself.
No, so without giving away too much, I was kind of there when a lot of the stuff first leaked. Um, it's kind of in the weeds with some people when that first leaked, and I was very aware of it, and I did have the chance to go through it. So I am pretty familiar in terms of the code base. Did I do anything with it or change much? Um, Not particularly, but I guess just in terms of scope, I have an idea what I'm going into for my familiarity. Being around a lot of people who were doing that.
Got it. Okay.
So we had a question from Lucas Nimni, who is asking whether or not there'll be workshop supports. Presumably, it's built into TF2 SDK, but would you enable that for Parkour? For Parkour Forever, or is that some sort of stretch goal? Is that something that you haven't considered yet?
I'd say that comes down to, is there anything stopping us, right? And I don't really think there
Yeah.
would be, to be honest. So, so long as there's no big reason why we can't, that almost seems like something that should kind of be, by default.
Sort
So
of a
I would
win-win.
I would say yeah.
How would you imagine utilizing it?
Basically, I mean, for workshop, it would be for maps. That would be for map distribution.
Okay. I mean, there's maps. There's potentially unique items. My mind is set to, again, the whole sort of animation of individual person running up a drain pipe. But I suppose there's always going to be. You're not limited to what you see of yourself when you're playing in a first person. There's always other people doing other things on maps. Could you imagine a scenario where people are taunting on a drain pipe?
Oh, never thought of that. That's another idea for the book.
Taunting on a drain pipe. I just want to see the music video for that. Oh, by the way, I'm talking to a guy who's working on TF2 VR, sort of a envisaging of VR for Team Fortress 2. That conversation is happening on the 30th of this month, so just under 2 weeks' time. Is there anything that any questions you want me to sort of ask them on your behalf?
At one point in the past, the original Parkour Fortress, there used to be a command, some might remember it, where you would enable, I believe, your third person model in your first person. It was something like that. That was meant
Yep.
for VR, not Parkour Cam. I see that in fact. That's not what I'm referring to. But that did always leave me pondering the possibility of, would this work out in actually running it in VR? That's the one. CL first person use world model. Yeah, that's the one. I'll say, kind of indirectly, anything is open. Yeah, I mean, you could let them know, like, if they want to work on something, doors always open.
Wow. I mean, sort of coming together of great minds. That'd be kind of amazing. My perception of what I want from VR in TF2 is to be able to be running in one direction and looking behind you. I think it'd be quite another thing to be able to look in one direction, run in one direction, look behind you, and then jump a great chasm of a gap, and maybe look down without inadvertently heading in that direction. A very strong possibility that at some point I wouldn't just throw up, but I'd also wee myself.
Yep.
Yeah.
that was actually, I believe there has been discussion on that, and one of the thoughts was, motion sickness, but
Yeah,
it would still be
also
worth it, if you ask me.
motion sickness plus vertigo. What a great combination.
Get a couple of drinks in there too.
Why not?
Yeah.
Everything is worse with drinks. Right. Well, Screwdriver, thank you very much for coming in today. Thank you for answering random spurious questions. And I let's not leave it so long as the next TF Connect before our next conversation.
Oh, I mean, hey, like I said, come grab a beer with me in like a month or so. I'm
That sounds
coming
good.
over for that LAN, so you know the deal.
I know the deal. I will pull out all the stops to get there.
You know it.
All right, GG. Take care.
You too.